not open that door. But they did. What they found inside was beyond imagination. This is the entire story of true crime. Ed Gein. Ed Gein was not born a monster. He was born into isolation. He grew up on a small farm near Plainfield, Wisconsin, surrounded by empty land, harsh winters, and silence. From the beginning, his world was narrow, controlled, and cut off from society. At the center of that world stood his mother, Augusta Gein. She was intensely religious, deeply authoritarian, and emotionally dominant. She preached that the modern world was corrupt, that desire was sinful, that women were immoral by nature. Ed was taught to fear human connection. He was taught that obedience was virtue and curiosity was dangerous. As a child, he was shy, withdrawn, and socially awkward. At school, he was bullied. At home, he was isolated. His father was an alcoholic and largely absent. When his father died, nothing changed. The isolation simply deepened. Years later, Ed's brother Henry died under suspicious circumstances during a fire near the family farm. Although questions were raised, no charges were filed. Ed was left alone with his mother. For years, they lived together in near total seclusion. No visitors, no friends, no outside influence. Ed's identity never fully developed. His sense of self became fused with his mother's beliefs. In 1945, Augusta Gein suffered a stroke. Shortly after, she died. For most people, grief fades with time. For Ed Gein, grief destroyed the remaining structure of his mind. Psychiatrists later described this moment as the psychological break, the point where fantasy and reality began to collapse into one. Ed did not accept his mother's death. He internalized it. He preserved her room exactly as it was. He sealed it off from the rest of the house. It became a shrine. From this point on, Ed Gein lived in two worlds. In public, he appeared harmless, quiet, polite, almost childlike. But internally, his mind was fragmenting. Doctors would later diagnose him with severe schizophrenia, marked by hallucinations, delusions, and dissociative thinking. Ed began to experience vivid internal scenes, images that felt real, voices that carried authority. In these visions, death was not an ending. It was a transformation. He became obsessed with anatomy, death, and the female body. Not sexually, but symbolically. He believed that by reconstructing bodies, he could reconstruct identity, including his own. At night, Ed began visiting local cemeteries. He targeted freshly buried graves. He did not act in panic or rage. He acted with ritualistic calm. He exhumed bodies and brought parts back to his farmhouse. From these remains, he created objects, household items, clothing. Psychiatrists later concluded that these acts were not driven by sadism. They were driven by psychosis. Ed believed he could become his mother, not metaphorically, but literally. In 1954 and 1957, Ed Gein murdered two women, Mary Hogan and Bernice Warden. The killings were blunt, sudden, and unemotional. There was no prolonged violence. Afterward, the bodies became part of his internal logic. When police entered his farmhouse in November 1957, they encountered something unprecedented. The house was not a crime scene. It was a manifestation of a fractured mind. Objects made from human remains were scattered throughout the home. The boundaries between person and object no longer existed. Ed was arrested without resistance. During interrogation, he spoke calmly, matter-of-factly. He showed no awareness of moral wrongdoing. Doctors declared him legally insane and unfit to stand trial. He was committed to a mental institution, where he spent the rest of his life. There, away from isolation and delusion, his behavior stabilized. He never killed again. Ed Gein died in 1984, alone, institutionalized. But his impact did not end with his death. His case became the foundation for modern horror, inspiring characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill. But the truth is more disturbing than fiction. Ed Gein was not driven by rage. He was driven by disintegration. He was not born violent. He was born broken. To understand Ed Gein, you have to understand the nature of his illness. Doctors who examined him described a mind locked in psychosis. Not intermittent, not temporary, but structural. Ed suffered from chronic schizophrenia, a condition that distorted his perception of reality, his sense of identity, and his understanding of cause and consequence. He did not experience hallucinations as intrusive thoughts. He experienced them as instructions. Scenes played repeatedly inside his mind. Memories blended with fantasy. Authority figures merged with internal voices. Most importantly, his sense of self never fully separated from his mother. Psychiatrists later concluded that Ed did not see himself as an independent person. He saw himself as incomplete. In his delusions, identity was something that could be constructed, assembled, or replaced. This is why the female body became symbolic, not erotic, not violent, symbolic. To Ed Gein, the body was a vessel, a structure, a container for identity. His obsession with anatomy was not driven by desire, but by logic distorted through illness. He believed that by reconstructing the physical form, he could reconstruct the mind. And by reconstructing the mind, he could erase himself. This is why his crimes lacked emotional expression. Witnesses and doctors noted the absence of rage, sadism, or pleasure. Instead, they observed detachment. When Ed spoke about his actions, he did so without excitement, without shame, and without fear. To him, these were not crimes. They were solutions. In the case of Mary Hogan, Ed acted suddenly. The violence was brief, blunt. There was no prolonged struggle, no escalation. In the case of Bernice Worden, the act followed the same internal logic. Afterward, Ed returned to routine. He went back to his farm. He cooked. He cleaned. He waited. This pattern is critical. Serial killers driven by compulsion escalate. Ed did not. Serial killers driven by gratification repeat. Ed did not. His actions were episodic, triggered by internal visions rather than desire. This distinction is why psychiatrists unanimously declared him legally insane. When Ed was institutionalized, something unexpected happened. His hallucinations diminished. His behavior stabilized. Removed from isolation, removed from obsession, and placed under structured care, Ed became calm. He cooperated. He followed rules. He showed no violent tendencies. This confirmed what doctors had suspected all along. Ed Gein was not dangerous because he enjoyed killing. He was dangerous because he could not distinguish reality from delusion. In a controlled environment, that danger disappeared. In isolation, it grew unchecked. Ed spent decades in mental institutions where he remained largely forgotten. He never attempted escape. He never showed interest in the outside world. The man who once tried to erase himself slowly faded on his own. When he died in 1984, there was no spectacle, no legacy in his own mind. But society did something else with his story. It turned it into horror. His name became shorthand for monsters. His illness became entertainment. His trauma became mythology. But the real lesson of Ed Gein is far more uncomfortable. The most terrifying danger is not rage. It is untreated psychosis.